Welcome to HipMojo Show 25. I'm your host, Ashkan Karbas-Fushan.
And I'm Rebecca Brayton in for CT Moore once again.
So this week, WatchMojo celebrated its 6-year anniversary, which makes us a dinosaur by web video standards, hopefully with a better outcome than what happened to the dinosaur. So we thought it would be interesting to just do a Q&A to look back at the good, bad, and ugly, and the pros and cons, and the highs and the lows of WatchMojo in its first 6 years. Take it away.
So the first question is the obvious million-dollar question. Why did you start WatchMojo originally?
I was working in an online magazine that got acquired by News Corp, and I had a non-compete, so I had to look at what my best options were for the next phase of my career. I was actually somewhat cynical about video. I used to call video as empty calories. I think people read articles a lot more than they consume videos, but way back in 2005, you could see that over time, the trends would be that video would grow quite a bit. And so basically, I wanted to stick in content. I wanted to stay in content, and I thought video would be a good bet. And because I couldn't do like a men's-focused publication because of my non-compete, I purposely picked a fairly broad publication. So producing videos for men, women, children, adults, to avoid the lawyers. The key really long-term was just to have a video on every topic, right? So that was sort of the big idea, that if we could produce videos and have a video that addressed each topic in the world, as ambitious as it sounds, over time, it would be a neat little business.
Cool. So describe the company you started versus the company that you run today. Now, one of the reasons I'm asking this is because I always have trouble, people ask me, you know, what is WatchMojo when I meet them on site? And I still have trouble succinctly and accurately describing to them what it is.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair enough. I mean, WatchMojo is at its core just like an online video magazine. We cover the same topics that you would read in a magazine or in a newspaper, just in video format. So I mean, if I'm describing it to my uncle, I'd say, you know, imagine a magazine or newspaper, but imagine that in video. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. It's also a little bit like what you see in cable programming. The idea is like our music content looks and feel like VH1. Travel looks like the Travel Channel. History like the History Channel. That's the idea, really, but I think at its core, it's just an online video magazine. You know, it's a bit like Wikipedia, but not user-generated and not in articles. It's a bit like About.com, but in video format. There's a bit more of an editorial tone than what you would get in Wikipedia, but really, it's just an online video magazine.
Right. But how has that changed?
Changed. Okay, great question. So when we started, I mean, like everyone else, we thought that great, produce content, exchange links, get that content indexed, and you have a big destination, sell ads against it, and you know, you're in the big leagues. It didn't really work out like that. We started in 2006. In 2007, 56% of video producers had their own and operated website. In 2010, that number fell to 18%. The reason is search engines do a crappy job of indexing videos. They basically read the metadata, like what the title is and the description and the keywords. That's how they index videos. So it's basically become impossible as a producer to have a property where you're master of your own domain. Where it's really changed, I would say, is that apart from the fact that we've improved the quality and really expanded our tentacles, what really changed from the first few months was, like many, we focused more on distribution over destination. But unlike most, we kept the website because we felt it was good to still have like a overall umbrella of all of our content. But that's why if you go to most video producers' website, it's a corporate page. It's a landing page with like about us. There's no content. We're sort of unique in that sense. But that's probably been the biggest change.
Now, you mentioned that our content is relatively similar to, you know, some cable stuff.
Discovery.
Now, so why would someone watch a WatchMojo production versus like a Travel Channel, Discovery Channel, HBO?
Very fair question as well. Well, for one, the reality is the same way that the record labels did not embrace Napster and put their music online, and initially the magazine, well, even to this day, magazines are not putting all of their content online, is that most television, be it network, broadcast, cable, or film studios, they're not going to put their content on the internet. It's, you know, to quote Jeff Zucker, former CEO of NBC Universal, they don't want to change their analog dollars for digital pennies. Right now, it's probably digital quarters, but it's still not digital dollars relative to analog dollars. So we could see that, you know, let's say you have a pyramid that represents content. At the top, you have traditional media. Those guys are not going to embrace the web. So we felt that if we could, in that vacuum, produce similar content, then we would fill a void. But two, I think it's length. The web has made us, look at Twitter, 140 characters. You know, the web has made us so short, bite-sized, micro content consumers that we wanted to, we'll do a 7-minute bio of the Beatles. We cover the most successful, one of them, or the most successful band of all time in 7 minutes. That's made, one of our users, emailed us a year ago, and he said, this is perfect for the Gen Y, sort of generation where we have like ADD and we can't, heck, I can't concentrate for more than 2 minutes, let alone 2 hours. So I think the idea is, one is there's a void on the internet, so we fill that void, and two, the formatting and the packaging makes sense for the web.
They blame Sesame Street for that, the lack of concentration?
I believe that because I watch Sesame Street now that I have 2 daughters. And what were we talking about? No, I'm kidding. All right.
So what has been the biggest surprise that you've had over the time with WatchMojo?
The biggest surprise probably has been, not to be cheesy, but that we've survived. I mean, if you take a look, I mean, you have to survive before you thrive. And I think now we're sort of in the last 18 months have hit a bit of a tipping point, thankfully, where we're growing, more partnerships, more validation, thankfully. Seeing how much, broadly speaking, online video was so hyped and the reality was so poor. Look at the number of technology companies in video that have blown up. There's really not been that many successful content companies. I think we stand out because we sort of were a survivor. There's a lot of successful content companies, and I look up to them and I respect their leaders. I'm just saying, relative to the amount of money that was invested, we never raised outside capital, but relative to the amount of money that's gone into the industry, it's actually been rather underwhelming. And I think, as much as the industry tends to drink the Kool-Aid, everybody's a mercenary, like they hype the latest thing that they're boosting, basically, I'm actually quite candid to say that I think videos have flopped relative to the expectations. People thought it was going to be the next search engine industry. They thought, who's the next Google? And like I always say, Google is the next Google of video because they bought YouTube. So I would say it's more the fact that the actual reality has been rather underwhelming. And thankfully, we didn't raise capital in that sense, so the expectations that we have to surpass are relatively low. But for most businesses in the industry, they're going to have a tough time getting their investors a return on their investment.
Okay. So tell us about some of the huge disappointments, mistakes, setbacks that you've encountered.
Is this an hour-long show? No, I mean, listen, to be honest with you, we've had a lot of, it's the relative apathy of the investment community towards content is a letdown. I mean, the fact that they'll keep putting money in the latest, sexiest fad, whether it was yet another social network, the latest link shortener, the latest location-based services. I mean, you name them, we've seen the fads come and go, yet content always seems to be detoured. But that's just a reality. Life's unfair, get used to it, move on. Two, I think, personally a mistake I did is I maybe invested a bit too much on the content side. In hindsight, I mean, I know you're hearing that as someone on the content side. I mean, it's great, content is king, but probably at some point I should have shifted gears and, maybe put a bit more on the business side and sales and expanded that faster. But I mean, overall, I think we've done a very good job. We've done an admirable job of building a business in content, which is tough. I just never understood, if I were to go back, like as an advice to an entrepreneur, like I came from a content company and I probably didn't open my blinders enough to say, well, if I don't want to do content, what else is out there? In hindsight, it worked out because we're successful, but I just think that content's, as I say, content is king, but it's basically ridiculed, mocked, spat on, pooped on. It's a very tough business to operate in, but we're sort of using that to our advantage, that it's very hard now to do what we've done, which is build this massive catalog. But I would say, yeah, without a doubt, the fact that content is not necessarily king, or content without distribution is not necessarily king, that's been a bit of a disappointment.
Right. Now, your answer to this may be redundant, I'm not sure, but what would you say, would you be able to pinpoint the #1 thing that is holding WatchMojo back?
Without a doubt, I think being based in Montreal, I mean, the reality is content is a long-term bet. I think nowadays with, you read TechCrunch, you follow all this VC-funded stuff, and you have to realize once you decide to go into content, you're not a tech firm. Like Machinima, which is the #1 content producer on YouTube, they're massive. They've been around since 2000, and sometime in 2006 or 5 or 7, they basically pivoted into being a YouTube platform. Vice, also from Montreal, I mean, they've been around since 1994, and now Forbes writes that they're crushing it, and they're doing a lot of things very well. So one, I think going into it, you have to realize that content takes a lot longer to grow. That's fair. Hearst has been around for 150 years. Rupert Murdoch has been around forever. So I think one, you just have to realize it's a different time horizon. But I would say being in Montreal is probably a good place to start a company, but there's a reason why I spend 25–30% of my time in New York. That's been holding us back. And then as a result of being in Montreal, I would just say the lack of resources. Like maybe, if we lied to the investor, the people who are interested to invest, I could lie to them and say, this is the game plan. Maybe we're a bit too candid, but ultimately I think you need resources to grow. If you don't put water on a plant, well, that plant's not going to grow as fast as if you actually feed it and give it, sunlight and all that jazz. So those are probably the things holding us back. I think we have a great team. I think our catalog is amazing. I think our distribution is pretty strong. So a lot of the elements are there for us to take off, but obviously being in Montreal and not having outside capital, I mean, those are two overwhelming, not strikes, but they're two overwhelming obstacles that as an entrepreneur, people say start a company where the talent is. Sure, but start a company where the ecosystem is as well. And I think that's why you see tech companies going to San Fran and increasingly New York. And I think as a media content company, we have no business being in Montreal, as much as it's a great city.
There's that theme again.
There's that theme again, yes. Hence why it's called the theme, I'm sorry.
Greatest accomplishment, and I've put in my notes, please don't say winning the lawsuit.
Yeah, well, the lawsuit would not be the greatest accomplishment. The lawsuit is just like a little footnote, anecdotal. It's fun to talk about, blah, blah, blah. I would say the greatest accomplishment, and this is really cheesy, and I'm not saying this because there's a few of the people listening in the staff. I would say the fact that we have the same team that we've largely had. I mean, if you think about it, let's say we've had, a team. The freelance base probably is over 100, but the core employees, let's say we've had 15 to 20, and I would say 13 to 15 of those people are still with the company. That's really neat. I mean, this is a big cliche. I think culture trumps a lot of other things. I mean, it's like you can make a decision to put profit ahead of people or people ahead of profit, and then the profit takes care of itself. So when I think of it as, we do have this very unique culture. We've survived. We're starting to thrive, so to speak. And it's a lot of the same people that sort of helped us build the company are still there. That is pretty cool. I don't want to name names. I get a lot of fellow CEOs who tell me about the cancerous climates that they find themselves in now because their VCs have forced them to bring on people that don't really have any of the common history, DNA, or values. These are important things. So for me, that's probably the number one thing. But at the end of the day, surviving and starting to be like going from an expensive hobby to, if we had the culture, but the company sucked, it wouldn't mean anything. It's the fact that the results are there and the results are starting to accelerate.
Okay, so let's do the other cliche question, which is realistically, where do you see the company in another 6 years?
Ooh, okay. I actually think that once my head started to change and my perspective changed, and I realized that content is a different sort of, it's like a recipe. You're not gonna make pulled pork in like a day. Pulled pork takes a while, and when done well, it's very good. I think in 6 years, we will probably be the most valuable brand / company that is focused on the production of video content for emerging platforms. So I think when you look at all of the companies that sort of have focused on producing content, WatchMojo will most probably be either the most valuable brand or the most valuable business that is focused on, new media video production. And notice I didn't say distribution. Even though we have good distribution, it's pretty clear you can't really excel at both. And I think that there could be another company that might generate a bit more revenue, but they might have massive costs. So their value is going to be less than ours. And I would say the last 18 months have given me the signs, and the last 6 months or even the last 6 weeks have given me some of the sort of validation that I need to be like, okay, this isn't delusional entrepreneur talk. I could see that happening. So that's where I see us in 6 years. Great.
Well, that's it. Tune in next week for another episode of HipMojo and play the drinking game. Spot the Seinfeld references.
What was the Seinfeld reference?
Oh, you always have
no,
Seinfeld.
No, on this show.